You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This week's episode is about productivity. It's a discussion I had with one of the patrons of The Voluntary Life about getting into the habit of doing weekly reviews and some of the difficulties that you can encounter when you take on a productivity system, such as the getting things done approach. This discussion is a recording taken from the live stream that I do monthly with patrons of The Voluntary Life. And I've just released another really interesting discussion to my patrons as a bonus podcast, also from the live stream, this discussion about the topic of ending friendships. So if you're interested in getting that bonus episode and all the other episodes, please do support The Voluntary Life by becoming a patron at patreon.com/thevoluntarylife, or you can find a link to that on my website, thevoluntarylife.com. I want to say a big thank you to the new patrons who've signed up over the last week. They are Joan R. and Chris H. So now I'm going to play you the recording of this discussion about getting into doing the weekly review. The audio was bad in the very beginning of the discussion, so the recording I'm going to play you starts just after the beginning of our conversation, but you can understand what we're talking about, and we've only just begun talking about the challenges of establishing a habit of doing a weekly review as part of a new productivity system. So I hope you enjoy hearing this, and without further delay, here is our discussion.
Often I tend to focus on the little tasks which are easy to tackle, and dedicating time for the bigger picture is something that doesn't happen so often. And as I started working again, I have now limited time. So I'm wondering if you can recommend when is the best time to do them, especially the weekly reviews, because they need some preconditions, like having a couple of hours and having a certain state of mind to really think about the project in the bigger picture.
Yes. Okay. So basically, you're having difficulty getting around to doing the weekly review, and you're also thinking, when is the best time? How could you make this easier? What would be the good time to do it, and that kind of thing? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Now, let me just ask you, what is in your weekly review? What does that mean to you? What are you actually doing?
Well, I have a checklist of things that I do, and it's reviewing my projects, also looking at my areas of focus. I have tried also the mind mapping, and I empty my email box and I go through my bank accounts. So I'm trying to clear everything. Okay,
well, first of all, I also found it very hard. Everyone finds it very hard to get into the habit of doing weekly reviews. So this is not unusual. This is one of the really difficult things about getting things done, is that there's so many different habits, and you've sort of taken on a whole system all at once, and that is a lot of work. And so basically, this is quite normal. Oh, and by the way, I also wanted to just mention your audio is way better now. So whatever you're doing now, that's great. It's like 10 times better.
Yeah. So I'm just sitting still and I'm not.
Okay, good. Yeah. So everyone has this problem. And so I've got a few thoughts about it. Firstly, you just have to keep going back to doing this. You're going to fall off the wagon. You're going to stop doing a weekly review or miss it 1 week or something. You just have to really have the persistence to, even when you stop doing it, to get back to doing it. So don't expect this to just click in and be, something that, okay, now you are doing easily every week. That's not the way it's going to happen. So this will happen. However, I do have some suggestions to make it easier. So the first thing is, when you have the weekly review, here's something that worked for me. I found it to be such a huge amount of stuff to do in a weekly review. And as you mentioned, it takes some different types of mentality as well. Not only are you clearing all your inboxes, but you're also trying to plan out, your future creative projects and get an overview of your life and stuff. So basically, one thing that you might find it helpful to do is to split this review up into 3 different parts: the clear review, the current review, and the creative review. Have you heard that terminology before?
No.
Okay. So the idea is this, that when you do a weekly review, there's 3 things that you're wanting to do. The first is you want to clear all your inboxes. And this is the clear review, right? So essentially, when you do this is just a matter of, like you said, something about checking your bank balances and, you want to clear make sure you get to inbox 0 and all of that. This is basically tidying up work that you have to do just to make sure that stuff is not accumulating that you haven't processed and decided what it is. And so this is one aspect of the weekly review. Now, when I found the weekly review getting too much for me, what I did was break it up, and I decided to do all of that stuff on one day. So I for example, I did that on the Thursday, and I just took some time and I did all of the tidying everything away, getting to inbox 0, working out, all of the stuff that had accumulated and checking everything that needed to be checked and the basic maintenance tasks that I wanted to get out of the way. So that when you've done that, that is almost one particular piece of work that requires a certain mindset. And it's not a creative mindset. It's more just like, this is you being your own secretary and essentially making sure that you empty inboxes and work out if you had little scraps of paper or notebooks that you had ideas that you've gone through and checked all of that. So you get all of that out of the day, and then try doing the other stuff on the next day or on another day, right? So for example, for me, what I did is I did all the getting clear stuff I did on a Thursday. Then on the Friday, what I would do is do the current review. And that's where you go through your projects and you make sure that you know what your next actions are, and you make sure that you know everything that you're doing on all the projects. Now, if you really want to split it up, you can also, rather than do everything on the Friday, you can do all of the stuff related to your current projects on the Friday, which is essentially you're in executive mode. You're going through and making sure that you know what you need to do. You're making sure that you know what your next actions are on all projects. But there is a third aspect to the review, which is the creative review. And that's, for example, when I look through my someday maybe list and think about, like, is there anything on here that does this spark anything for me? Just reading through my someday maybe projects. And for example, I look in my creative review, I look at the wish lists that I have on Amazon and on Audible, and look at the books that I'm thinking about reading, and all of these more future oriented, forward looking stuff. So when I was splitting these things up, I would do that on a Saturday, and that would be like my Saturday morning, more like a weekend thing. It was more creative. And so I split. So my weekly review was actually 3 different sessions. You might find it useful to do that. And that helped me a lot because it meant that I could get into the right frame of mind for each of these different sessions and not be overwhelmed by just trying to do everything all at once. So that's my first suggestion. I've got a couple of other thoughts, but before I get onto them, does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I found it very difficult to switch between these modes of thinking. And I would do much more of the cleaning stuff because it just felt good, and it just felt incredible to delete emails and just to close loops.
Yes.
And then for the more creative tasks, I need some time to get into this mood, and it doesn't just happen like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that could really help you. And also, you know what? The other good thing is that if you were saying that you tended to focus on the cleaning tasks because they were, in a way, the easier thing to do, then this is also a little bit of discipline for you, because it means you've got one day, like the Thursday, for example, where you're going to do all of that stuff. But when it comes to Friday, you know that's done, right? Now it's time to switch mindsets, and now you have a different task in mind. And that, in a way, will give you a fresh start on the other things. The other thought I had, though, was you mentioned that one of the things that you're trying to do is mind maps. Now, one of the difficulties of the weekly review, is there's only so much you can get done without this turning into just an enormous task. And I think if you're actually doing mind maps, that is more like project work than doing a review. So just explain to me, what mind maps are you doing in a weekly review?
Well, it's for me it was more like trying the tool, and I did one which I put my name in the middle, and then I tried to map my whole life.
Yes.
And this in a way helped me also identify my areas of focus.
Yes.
And then I have done one for a work project, and I think that was it.
Right.
I think still I need to play some more with it to find the real benefits, because it's at the moment I just write these things and they're there and it doesn't bring me anything. But maybe I have to find out exactly in what cases it's helpful.
Well, my suggestion for you would be this. When you're doing a weekly review, it's always difficult to know how much should you be doing on each individual project, because ultimately you could spend an hour on each project doing good project planning work. And if that's the task that you get in each weekly review, then it will take you a day to do a weekly review, right? So it'll become totally overwhelming. So the way that I think about it when I'm doing the weekly review is, when you review your projects, you've got to answer this one question. Do I know what the next action, do I have a good next action on this project? Do I know what the next thing is to do, right? And there is always a hell of a lot more project planning that you need to do, but that's work that you actually have to find time for to work on your projects during the week or something. You know what I mean? So, for example, if you want to do some planning work which involves doing for a particular project, doing a mind map or something, I would do that when you're working on the project. Treat that as project management time for the project. In your weekly review, obviously do as much as you can, but the criteria for how much to do is this. You want to go through all of your live projects and you want to make sure you know what the next action is. If you at least know what the next action is, then you're able to continue working on that project. It's not stalled. You know what you're doing. And maybe sometimes the next action might be, I need to do a mind map of this project to get my head around what I'm trying to do or something like that. But just defining the next action is the thing to do. As far as a mind map for your areas of focus is concerned, that is an extremely helpful thing to do. And I do that. And I actually do that. I kind of do that every week. So I do understand what you're doing with that in your weekly review. The way I do it is I look at all of the projects that I've got, and I make sure I know which area of focus they're all attached to, so that I've got a picture of how all these projects fit together in terms of the different areas of focus of my life. And the one thing I would say on that is, if you're finding that at the moment a bit difficult, or if you find that it's taking too much time, that mind map of your areas of focus, that will get easier and easier. Because once you've started to map out your areas of responsibility, then, when you first start, you're kind of finding your way and not really thinking about it. But once you've realized that, you have an area of responsibility for finance and an area of whatever it is, then it's not like you're going to forget that. So it's very slow at first, but it gets faster and faster. So basically, just crack on, and you'll find that part will get easier and easier.
Yeah, I believe that. And I think the whole system, it needs some time to organically develop.
Yes.
And I'm already getting the benefits, and I think it would further grow. But just at this stage, some of the concepts are still not so clear.
Yeah, well, this is what everyone experiences with GTD, and this is the most difficult phase, because everyone starts getting into having a productivity system, and then there's this first enthusiasm, which is like, oh, this is great, this is going to be so good. And you go through it for a week and you feel so much better because you've cleared your inboxes and you've done some project reviews, and then you realize that there's actually a lot of work involved in getting the system started and in maintaining it, and that amount of work gets less and less over time. But you just have to get through the first adoption phase, where all these things they're not muscle memory yet. I mean, now these are all habits that are so ingrained for me that it's easy. And it will get to be that way too, but you've just got to get through that phase where everything is still a bit, where you have to remind yourself, what am I doing again? What's the purpose of this habit? I don't really, it's just all quite exhausting. And so it is a bit of a pain, this phase, but there's great stuff once you get through it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And also it's a journey of self-discovery in a way, and discovering your own patterns. For example, I found out that I like ticking off boxes, and sometimes I would just write some tasks just to tick them off.
Right.
And it's really easy for me to get lost in these little things.
Yes.
And going up for the bigger picture is something that I need to put some effort into.
Right. Well, it's fantastic to hear about your experience in taking it on. I get so much out of it that I'm always really pleased when people start adopting these habits, because I just think they're great.
Yes.
You said you had another question, but before we get onto that, is there anything else on the weekly review stuff that you thought was, is there anything else you wanted to ask me about that?
Well, that's it. I think I have to try it again with my next review. And,
yes.
And really split the tasks.
Yeah, try splitting them up, because you might find that helps. The other thing, I've mentioned this before on episodes about GTD, but there is a podcast which is called the Getting Things Done Virtual Study Group. And the very early stages of that podcast, the very early episodes are quite good if you're interested in hearing about people trying to overcome difficulties adopting in GTD. It's basically like a group of people who are all doing GTD, and they're all adopting it, and they're all saying like, oh yeah, I really find it difficult to do my weekly review or whatever. So later on, they kind of changed the focus of the podcast, and I got totally bored with it. And I found that it had like 3 or 4 different people take over, and they took it in different directions. And frankly, I didn't find it any help at all. But if you can go back and listen to the very early episodes, you may find that some of that is encouraging, because you'll hear about people who are saying basically exactly what you've just said, and you kind of talking to each other about the different techniques that they've found helpful. And when I was really getting into it, that's something that I was listening to.
Great. I'll check it out.
All right, cool.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you like this podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron of The Voluntary Life on Patreon. Your support will help to grow and improve the show, and you'll get access to a treasure trove of rewards, including bonus episodes. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to learn more.